Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So in this video, I want to cover a new upcoming weapon set. As you may have heard, we'll be getting a new dungeon, the Demon Web Pits. And it will have a master version, which I have multiple gameplay videos of completing, and I'll make a guide shortly on it. So you can have an advantage on what you can expect with the mechanics and how to counter them. So we have these new perfect weapons of Lolth. And again, they are coming from the master version of the dungeon. So you'll need like 85,000 item level to enter, or 80,000 if you're on private queue. So when you finally beat the dungeon, very similar to like Tower of the Mad Mage, Xemnid's Reliquary, Zariel, it has a weapon set which can drop. And this time you'll be able to neither greed between your 5 players. So unlike a trial with 10 people, it would be a bit easier to get your weapons. But yeah, you're going to have all of the 18 different weapons dropping, so the main hand and offhand of all the different classes. So it will be quite a grind to get your weapons. But yeah, very nice to see that you can just attain them like that. You don't have to go like spending astral diamonds, etc. So we want to compare these perfect weapons to the Weaver weapons, then the Durgar, the new Masterwork weapons, and Mirage weapons. But first, let's have a look at what these weapons actually give us. They have a set bonus that will give us Demon Web Empowerment. This will increase our damage and healing by 3%, and then we'll also take reduced damage when our stamina is low. So if we have no stamina left, we'll take 7.5% less damage. But then we have at the start of combat, you'll gain crit strike and crit severity increase by 1%. And for every 5 seconds you're in combat, this increases again by another 1% to a maximum of 5% increase. So after 20 seconds in combat, you will have 5% crit strike and 5% crit severity added to your stats. So you could build around that. And the bonus then is pretty useful in boss fights, which are gonna last, like 3 to 5 minutes or so. Now, another thing with these weapons is the sheer amount of item level, 2,475. That's a pretty big bump up from like the Weaver weapons at 2,050. You have over 400 item level increase across both the weapons. Before we jump into comparing those other weapon sets for damage dealers versus each other, let's have a talk about healers and tanks. What will you be wanting to use in the next module? Well, many of you may have been using like the Feywood weapons or the older mastered weapons, since they all have the stronghold bonus, and as a tank or healer you would use these to give those boosts to your teammates. So you would give your damage dealers extra outgoing damage and reduction to their incoming damage. So you're providing them damage and survivability. The Feywood ones did the exact same thing, just gave you a little bit more item level and still give that 2% buff. And the new Durgar weapons will be even better then, because more item level, and now specifically for a healer they give plus damage. They give this stat just here, which increases your healing. It might seem like it doesn't since it says it gives damage, but yes, this affects your base healing. So the more you have of it, the more healing you're gonna do. And they still provide your team the 2% outgoing damage and the 2% damage resistance, along with yourself for 2% total healing. So yeah, for min-max tanks and healers, these will be best in slot. Tanks will gain an extra threat with the increase to their base damage there. However, outside of serious content where your DPS don't need the added 2% survivability and the 2% damage increase, you could totally just run with the perfect weapons as well. They'll be very useful on a healer for, again, the 3% outgoing healing, the survivability boost they can provide when your stamina is low, and the 10% stats, which will also help healers with the crit strike and crit severity, along with the sheer amount of item level and increase of the base damage bonus to 250. And same for tanks, this will all be providing extra threat, increasing your damage, along with survivability when your stamina or your shield is low. So let's move back to DPS and compare, first of all, the Weaver weapons to these new Perfect weapons. So let's actually compare it against the Weaver weapons, which just have a bonus there, as we've seen before, which gives you damage depending on your enemy's hit points, and then a damage buff to you and your team, and then also a 5% damage buff when in Underdark. These Perfect weapons are not tied to Underdark, so most definitely they will become pretty good in the following modules. So they'll be well worth to head towards, unlike, let's say, the Weaver weapons, which, were pretty much Underdark specific. And especially with these ones coming along, higher item level, same base damage. You can see 125, this being on the main hand. You will get also on the Weaver weapons 125, and then also on the offhand. So the base damage bonus here is exactly the same. It just adds to this here, which is usually only affected by your item level. So if we look at the math to compare them, we can see that the Perfect weapons, if you build around it correctly, will most definitely be best in slot for a boss fight where you aren't dying the whole time. Because those extra stats there, the crit 7, the crit strike, will fall off if you die. So if you aren't doing that, these are really good. Now, the reason I'm putting the difference in stats in accuracy instead of in crit strike and crit severity is because you will build around the weapons. You will move stats away from crit strike and crit severity and move them into like accuracy. Now, a very easy way to do it, like a half-ass solution, is to very simply, instead of using squash soup here that gives 5% crit strike and 5% crit severity, you go and use watermelon sorbet, which gives you some power and accuracy. The power, although, might be wasted on you if you're specifically running a raptor build. So yeah, the math checks out that there'll be a 1% additional damage gain over the Weaver weapons in Underdark content. The Weaver weapons will fall behind even more when they're not in Underdark because of that 5% gain here, which adds to a little bit more of your damage buffs. And just keep in mind, this Weaver set here is also when you're running with 3 other damage dealers also running Weavers. So again, they'll be even worse off when your teammates are running something like Mirage or some other set which is personal and not supporting the team like Weaver would a little bit. That's definitely the big advantage of Weavers, is that they can provide a bonus also to your tanks and healers of 2% to their survivability and 2% to their outgoing healing. But yeah, mathematically, in an ideal scenario, if you build correctly around the Perfect weapons, they'll be better than Weaver, especially when we move outside of Underdark content, which may very well happen next module. So then we want to compare it against the new Masterwork weapons. For this example, I've got the +1 versions, which might be very expensive, talking in words like 5 million plus. So probably not worth it, but let's have a look at the math comparing them. The +1 variants will have 2000 item level, whereas the just standard ones will have 100 item less at 1900. Now you can see the base damage is a little bit lower at +100 per weapon. Again, on a rogue, on like a barbarian where you only use one weapon, those will be added together and just be put on the main hand. You can see like the Perfect ones are running 125, these ones are running 100. You'll be able to buy these and you'll be able to craft these. And they have the Stronghold set. Basically, you provide you and your team with 2% outgoing damage, 2% outgoing healing, and 2% less damage taken. Very nice and very good when you're learning content. And especially with having these having their base damage now, they become more competitive with like the Weaver weapons, or the Perfect weapons, or even Mirage. And with having the survivability boost, if you're running content where you need the survivability, like some master content, they become really good for that. However, if you're just looking at raw damage, well, they fall behind quite a bit from the Perfect weapons. Again, this is comparing the Duergar Mercenary +1 weapons if your other allies, your other DPS, the 3 other DPS in your party are also using them. If they're not using them, well, they fall behind even more. But again, just like to express, the main benefit of these is that they are not that far behind, and they do provide a survivability boost, which is pretty significant, up to 10% when your full team is using them. But let's move on to the Mirage weapons. Well, there's currently some of them overperforming on certain classes, and since they perform differently per class, I can only look at the data I have. So for example, a wizard can deal 16% of its damage with the Mirage weapons. Is that enough to compete with the stat difference and the item level difference of, let's say, the perfect weapons? Well, again, look at the math and you can see that moving to the perfect weapons, you would gain over a 13% damage increase. So your Mirage weapons have to deal more than that damage amount. When you look at like a parser, like here, it was dealing 16%. So yeah, Mirage weapons would be better then. But Mirage weapons are not in like a fixed state. They can change them at any time. I don't recommend going out there and heavily investing in them, buying them off the auction house. You can very well go out there into the river district and farm them yourself. It takes about 4 weeks, at least, to get the arcane focus. And it might be something you want to do. You can always unbind them and sell them again if they fall behind. Who knows, they can always break them again and make them overpowered. They are also pretty cool that when you use an encounter power, you summon 3 clones of yourself, which is pretty unique for a weapon set, and they'll all deal some damage and you can get combat advantage with them, and they last for 10 seconds then disappear, and then you can get them back again in 30 seconds. Now the only time they actually deal this much damage is when you are in high item level content. They obtain like a multiplier, which makes them deal significantly more damage than if I'm just, let's say, in this zone and beating up these enemies. They don't have as high item level as, let's say, in the Master or Trial Exempted Reliquary or the new dungeon. So those clones would do significantly less damage if you just want to run your random dungeon queues and you want to be doing as much damage as possible. If you want to do that, absolutely the perfect weapons would be better. However, again, they are coming from the master version of the upcoming new dungeon, so don't expect them to be very easy to obtain. They are going to be, on a proper build, best in slot. That's no doubt by looking at the math, specifically in those long boss fights and even in content outside of Underdark, which is pretty nice. If you're working towards getting weapons, working towards completing this dungeon, you can obtain yourself a free set. Simply do the North Dark Reaches campaign. When you get to 800 points, you can go and you can craft yourself your stormforged weapons here. You can watch my videos on how to do it. You'll just have to do a whole bunch of quests and some grinding. Can take a while, but they are some very good weapons with their base damage increase along with their bonus, which you can align very well in an artifact wall in Underdark content to gain those damage boosts. So hopefully this was somewhat insightful for you guys, just showcasing the math again versus those different weapons and seeing which ones come out on top mathematically. Again, we'll have to see. It'll depend on the content. For example, if I'm running AoE content, just want to one-shot everything, you're not going to wait around for the stats you would gain from the weapons. So yeah, you might be better off just getting these to 90%, your crit and crit severity, rather than leaving them at 85%. But just going around here and killing enemies is pretty trivial when you're on this high item level build with these kind of stats. You should not have any trouble here. Like on a rogue, you can one-shot everything. So to conclude, yes, the perfect weapons are best in slot for everybody. However, if you want to be a true tank and a healer, you want to be running the weapons that are going to give your damage dealers the best bonus, which is the Stronghold set weapons, like the Sturgar ones or the older mastered ones, or you would have the Sharandar ones, which are like the Feywood ones, but they'll be really expensive. You provide your team those 2% buffs, and if your tank does the same, that's a 4% buff to damage and damage resistance and healing to your entire team. That's the best way to go as a support. Damage dealer, yeah. Perfect Weapons will be best in slot for all the content outside of like some serious AoE build. If you want to work around that, maybe you want to go Weaver instead. And otherwise, Mirage Weapons in its current state, as far as I know, it's really powerful on a Bard, then like a Ranger, and Wizards it's also pretty good. For a Rogue, they kind of suck. Same with the Barbarian, Fighter, Warlock, they're all rightish. They'd probably compete on a similar level to the Perfect Weapons, maybe a little bit less. But yeah, it depends where you're at, and Mirage Weapons are easy and accessible to obtain. It just takes quite a grind. You're not limited behind a master dungeon like you are with the Perfect Weapons. But just be warned, they can change them at any time. Who knows, with Model 26 they may very well go and nerf them. And again, they only really work in high item level content like your Xemnid's Reliquary and your Demon Web Pits dungeon, where the item level to enter is like 80,000. That's the same item level as your enemies. You look at like Rise of Tiamat, it's all the way down at 70,000, and your advanced dungeons, they're like 45,000, 35,000. So Mirage will do drastically less damage there, and you'd be better off again with Perfect Weapons, just with the base damage increase, or stormforged weapons as I mentioned earlier. So a special thank you to all these channel members for their added support, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.